And we're going to divide this into two parts. And the first part is going to be becoming and being a continual learner. Because we've got to model what being a learner is all about, all of our lives. And I just wanted to share a few things with you before getting started on this. Can everybody hear me okay? Okay, great. Just to tell you something of kind of my age where I'm at, I've actually been a Christian for 47 years. I wasn't baptized as a baby, I promise. I was a teenager. And I've been in the ministry for 40 years. And it's really easy, isn't it? As we grow as leaders, as we've been at things a while, we've seen a lot, we've counseled a lot, we have a lot of experience. Some of us, I have a lot of experience. And it can be easy to think, I got this. You know, I've seen this before. And we do learn a lot from experience, but I've got to be a learner every single day of my life. In fact, that keeps me happy. It keeps me vibrant. I love being a learner. It's a deep conviction I have. Yet I don't always do it just right. But it is easy to rely on our own experience and wisdom. In the posture of learning, I just want to read a scripture that we're very familiar with, but I believe it describes the posture of learning that we need to have. Luke chapter 10, beginning in verse 38. As Jesus and his disciples were on their way, he came to a village where a woman named Martha opened her home to him. She had a sister called Mary who sat at the Lord's feet, listening to what he said. But Martha was distracted by all the preparations that had to be made. She came to him and asked, Lord, don't you care that my sister has left me to do the work by myself? Tell her to help me. Martha, Martha, the Lord answered, you are worried and upset about many things, but only one thing is needed. Mary has chosen what is better, and it will not be taken away from her. You know, one of the attributes that marks Mary of Bethany's life is her posture to be at the feet of Jesus. Whether it was learning in this way, whether it was begging God for her brother's life, or whether it was an extravagant anointing of Jesus. You know, Mary had a posture on her knees. And sisters, really, do we feel sometimes all set? You know, comfortable where we are? Or do we have the conviction that God really expects us to keep learning? We learn on purpose. And in order to do that, we have to say no to other good things. What are you learning from the Bible today? From Jesus? You know, sometimes it's even easier to prepare for lessons and read for others than out of the heart of what we've truly learned. I love the scripture in 2 Peter 1, beginning in 5. It says, add to your faith. And then in 1 Timothy 4, where Paul is talking about different things to have in your life, it says, so that everyone can see your progress. I love it. I love it when somebody says to me, well, I've really seen you grow in this area. Sometimes we can think, what does that mean? Does that mean I was really, really awful in this area? Sisters, I hope that we will take that as a great compliment, because no matter how old we are in the Lord or how young we are in the Lord, our progress of learning needs to be evident. All those around us, those in our family group, those in the church where we lead, or whatever we're participating in, do they see our progress day after day? You know, learning often comes unintentionally, and I'll say a little something about that, but it always needs to be intentional. And my first point is learn on purpose. You know, how do we do this intentionally? Karen hit a lot of the verses, actually, that I was going to talk about today, which is great because it says we really need to know this, and also allows me to expound on a little more details of it. But so many times the word consider is in the Bible. The Proverbs, consider the ant. Jesus says, consider the lilies of the field. Hebrews 10, consider how to stir each other up to love and good deeds. It takes a lot of purposeful thought, a lot of meditation and prayer. Now, we've gotten a lot from this conference already, right? From the day yesterday to today, what if I were to just call on one of you and just say, what did you learn? What did you learn? I don't know about you, but for me, it's easy to think, it was great. It was awesome. I was moved. But it takes time to digest and to go away with something that we can say, I have really learned this because I've done this on purpose. I've gone about it specifically and deliberately. What did you learn about God? What did you learn about yourself? And how you are in your family and in your ministry? What did you learn that will actually change the way you view or do something? It's harder than you think sometimes, isn't it? I've had to learn to enumerate because once you've considered and expressed something, then you need to share it and talk about it. I really can't answer yet very well, very intelligently what I learned yesterday. I have a lot of things going on in my mind and a couple specific things from the fellowship. But I haven't taken the time yet to internalize it and take it into my heart. Whether it's a conversation at breakfast, a conversation in the fellowship, combined with the stirring of the Spirit, the things that rumble around in our hearts. But there are some ways to learn on purpose. And a lot of where we need to do is find out, we're pretty good at knowing the things we need to learn, but we're not always so good at knowing the things that we need to learn that we don't know we need to learn. And so we're thinking, I'm going to go after this. I'm going to really learn this. And meanwhile, we have some blind spots in us. And I remember I was much older than these women. I can't remember Laura Garcia's maiden name at the moment. But, and Gail Butterfield, I believe at the time. And I was in a discipleship group in Boston. I hadn't been there that long. They were much younger than me. And they started sharing some things about, Jeannie, I don't feel like you're really very real. And I thought, I have no clue what they're talking about. What do you mean real? I mean, I can pinch myself, I feel it, I don't get it. You don't make others feel like you need them. And I had become so good at stuffing the things I felt that I didn't even know what they were. There's a movie that I don't know how many of you have seen. It's called Runaway Bride. And there's a scene in that really hit me because her fiance at the time is saying, how do you like your eggs? And she thought, I really have no idea. So she went through fried eggs, poached eggs, scrambled eggs, eggs Benedict, all these kind of things. She had no idea. And sometimes we just don't know kind of who we are, what we think, and we've got to learn this. I really had to learn this, and it involves a lot of prayer, and it involves brothers and sisters. It involves soul searching to understand, because we can't really learn something when we don't understand it, and when we don't know we need to learn it. It took Bible study to gain conviction. So I thought, you know what? I need to learn how to be vulnerable. I have no idea what that means. And I always thought I was, because I thought I shared what I felt, just I didn't ever know what I felt. So, I started asking people, what does this mean to you? I read books on the subject. At that time, it was a long time, telling yourself the truth, telling each other the truth. One I've read recently, I Told Me So. I read a lot of books. But I said, I want to share something that's vulnerable, that I'm feeling or struggling with, or that I don't do well every time I talk to somebody. And then when I finish a conversation, I'm going to ask them, I'm going to tell I'm really working on being vulnerable. How did I do at being vulnerable? And that was the only way I knew how to make progress. And since that time, I've gone after a number of other things that I've been learning. I'll share some of those, but whatever it might be for you. And I remember the day someone came up to me after sharing in a class and said, you are so vulnerable, Jeannie, that maybe you should share some of the victories instead of all the ways you're messing up. And I was like, yes! I'm so excited because I wanted and needed to learn vulnerability. I don't know what it is for you. I've had to go after learning, wow, I can be judgmental and self-righteous. I don't like that. And I don't want to be that way. So I had to ask other people, how do you see this in my life? And I have to ask people, not just people who maybe work with me in the ministry, but people who are in my family group. And really think of all of them, they're really my peers. If we're in the ministry, it doesn't mean we're have all these amazing qualities better than anybody else. We're just like everybody else. We've just maybe been around the sheep pen a little longer, and so can direct people a little more specifically, kind of on where to go and what will be helpful. What are some ways out of the sheep to be safe in the sheep pen? What do you need to learn? Learning to make those in your ministry feel valued, feel respected. Sometimes we think, sure, I do that. But the only way we're going to know that is asking people in your ministry, do you feel valued? Do you feel respected by me? I wanted to learn to be more generous because sometimes when I'm challenged with being generous with something, I can think, oh, man, she's going to really mess that up, if she borrows that. And I just want to not think about, about selfishness in that way. Learning to make people feel valued. Learning to be calm and gentle in my heart of hearts, not anxious and worried. Because I can go to really crazy places. I can have a headache, or somebody I love can have something going on, and pretty soon you're planning the funeral. I'm thinking, why does my mind go to crazy places like this? We've got to go after things specifically. Ask input in our about our lives from other people. What are some things I can really learn that you see I need to learn? And I'm going to talk about why we get afraid of that in just a moment. But also, going after it in the Bible, doing Bible studies, everything we can learn. Reading other books, asking other people, how am I doing? And letting other people know, this is what I'm learning, and I'm really on a journey to learn this. Please help me with it. I just find it so helpful to be able to communicate, this is what I'm trying to learn. And I hope I do that when I'm in my 70s, if God gives me that long, when I'm in my 80s till my last breath. I want to be a learner every single day of my life. Now sometimes I can be, and I think we can all be a little afraid of this. What keeps us from being learners on purpose? Fear. Exactly. I think fear is one of the big areas. Because we know how Jesus learned. And that's amazing to me that Jesus was such an incredible example. God in the flesh was a learner. He learned obedience through what he suffered. As a young boy, he learned by going to the temple and asking the elders and teachers questions. He learned, I believe, as he watched the lilies of the field. I love the way that the play portrayed it. I'm remembering that. I'm going to learn that. I'm going to remember it. Jesus was a learner. He modeled it for us, and yet he knew everything. But he modeled it for us. I believe we can be afraid of the suffering that we have to go through to learn. I know I can be. Jesus learned obedience through what he suffered. And if Jesus had to learn obedience through what he suffered, what does that say for you and me? How often do you ask to learn? Do you seek to learn? Again, not just from those discipling you or beside you in the ministry, but people who might have a harder time telling you, who might be fearful of that themselves. Sometimes insecurity stands in the way of us being a learner. We can think, I should really already know this. And so I don't want somebody to know I don't know this. We can be insecure about being forgotten. We can, and even begin to overcompensate and speak with exclamation points and bold print because we are insecure. You know, the Bible says in 1 Timothy 2:11 that a woman should learn in quietness and full submission. And sometimes I can be very tempted to learn in loud stubbornness. And yet insecurity is often at the root of that. We feel like, I should have learned it already. I should know this. I feel so stupid not knowing this. Why did I say that? Why did I give that advice? Why didn't I do this instead? We can beat ourselves up with insecurity instead of realizing we are always works in progress. And when I remember that I'm a work in progress, it really helps. What does it even mean to learn in quiet submission? You know, I think it means, it speaks to an attitude. Because out of the abundance of the heart, the mouth speaks. Our communication can be so full of emotion without any tentativeness in it. You know what I'm saying here? You know, there's a difference in saying, this is what I really believe about this, someone. I'm really thinking this is what's going on. Instead of saying, you are doing this, and you're doing that, and you're doing that, and it's making me feel pretty ticked off. You know, there's a big difference in saying something tentatively with an approach that, you know, I could be wrong here. It's the view I have out of my window, but I want to understand you. You know, what does it look like? It means we listen carefully. We watch. People can feel from us that we're eager to be taught, instructed, and corrected. You're not being defensive, but open and vulnerable with our marriage, with our children, in our life. You're saying, I want to know. I really want to learn. You know, people are thinking it anyway, what we need to learn. So we might as well ask it. We might as well go after it ourselves. You know, if we are, my husband talks about, you know, could you say that? And I mentioned being more tentative. Instead of often wrong, but never in doubt. You know what that means? We say everything strongly with exclamation points as if we know we're right and we're not in doubt. When really, I mean, things that are convictions, yes, we need to say strongly. We don't need to be in any doubt about those things. But when we're talking about our hearts, we're talking about things we're learning, we're talking about relational issues, we need to speak in a tentative way. We may be wrong. We may not know everything going on. And when we have the attitude of being a learner instead of always the discipler, we're going to make a lot more progress ourselves and help others. I love the scripture where Jesus says, come to me, learn from me, take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for I am humble and I am gentle in spirit, and you'll find rest for your souls. You know, that's so much of what Jesus portrays as we learn from him. It's easy because he's humble and he's gentle, and we'll find rest for our souls. You know, so as we learn, we also got to realize as we teach, and Amberjeet's going to talk more about teaching, do we portray humility? Do we portray gentleness in our souls and in our hearts? Do we have certain people we are willing to learn from? Are we willing to learn from everybody? You know, when we're desperate, we learn from everybody. I remember after we adopted our son, Jacob, who was a teenager, I was so thrown for a loop on so many things. I asked professionals, I asked non-professionals. I remember, I think I stopped a person on the street one time. I was just so desperate to learn. And when we're desperate to learn, we'll learn from non-Christians, we'll learn from young children? Will you learn from those who maybe we think don't have the best credentials, but we'll learn from every single person? Are you able to say, here's what I'm working on. Here's what God is teaching me. Here's what I'm learning from the scriptures. You know, I think asking each other, what are you learning now? And sharing what I'm learning is good to talk about with each other. You know, I can get out of practice with this. And I've made a decision, you know, I'm going to share with people, this is what I'm working on with God. This is what I'm learning. This is what God is teaching me. You know what it does? Helps other people relate to you, to know that you don't have it all together. Because when I share with people what I'm learning, whether it's vulnerability, or whether it's not being self-righteous or judgmental, or being more generous, you know, it helps people know my blunders and where I haven't learned it well, because we can all relate to each other so much better that way. You know, what are you learning? Are you going after it intentionally from anybody around you? Are you asking God to teach you? Are you asking others for your blind spots? And then are you purposefully in your conversation saying, I'm working on this. Help me. How did I do here? Have I made progress? Because I am a work in progress. And once I realized that, that helped me a lot. When I was working on this vulnerability thing, I remember a brother asked me, Jeannie, do you think it's okay to mess up? And I thought of it. I said, you know what? I don't really think I do. I'm such a perfectionist in my nature. I don't think it's okay to mess up. And when I realized when I thought that, I was going to be cooked. Because I mess up every day. But do you really believe it's okay to mess up? When you really get that, and you understand God is a God of grace, and He knows we're works of progress, it's a lot easier to admit and to share, you know what? I need help in this. I need to learn this. It doesn't matter that I've been a Christian for 47 years. And like somebody mentioned the other day, my grandparents and grandparents, I have a long history of family who are Christians. That means nothing if I'm not learning every day in my life. If I'm not saying, it doesn't matter the history, it doesn't matter whose classes I've been in, but am I still learning humbly? Am I going after it and able to enumerate, this is what I'm learning? I'm making progress. I am a work in progress, and that is great news. So sisters, love learning. Don't be afraid of learning. Learn on purpose through intentional seeking as well as suffering, because Jesus is gentle and humble in heart. And by learning, we really will find rest for our souls. And Brigitte's going to come up and talk to us about being trainers with what we learn.
I was ready for Jeannie to keep going. I was just sitting there going, please, keep going. I appreciate her so much. And we, spent the first part of our class talking about being learners ourselves. Because you're not going to be able to train anybody unless you know how to be trained. Unless you know how to be trained in your heart. Unless you open and seek that learning like she so wonderfully and richly talked about. I mean, I love her. We serve on the women's service team together, and I've had a chance over the last couple of years to really spend time with Jeannie, and she is. I mean, she and I think Karen Louie and Terry Fontenot, Tess Fontenot, Teresa, whatever you want to. She's changed her name now. So, but they're women that I'm always saying, okay, what books are you reading? What are you learning? What's going on? And I just appreciate having those examples and that she really models it. I want to talk in this second half, though, about what we need to do, because all of us are in leadership in one way or another. Maybe you're a Bible talk leader, a small group leader. Maybe you lead a large group of women. And I think one of the hugest needs, one of the biggest needs of the hour right now is training women to grow, training women in the ministry, because this is a leadership conference. This is the need of the hour. Because we've got to, I love, for those of you that got to be here on Sunday at the church service here in Singapore, it was an example. It was in living color. It was a flesh and blood example of the next generation. And I loved Anthony's point about watching and learning. But we have to be able to teach them what they need to do and who they need to be. And I want to talk a little bit about intentional training. You have got to have the intent to do this. It will not just happen. It won't happen by you just being a great example. That never works. I mean, how often? I mean, you're trying to be a great example. How many people have come up to you and said, "You're so much like Jesus. I really want to learn that." I mean, it just, it doesn't happen. I grew up in a denominational church where that was sort of evangelism. I'm going to be such a great example, and that's my evangelism. And as I got older, I thought, well, that doesn't make any sense. I mean, nobody in the workplace, very rarely does somebody in the workplace come up to you and say, "You're so much like Jesus, please teach me the Bible." And I think as women in the ministry, we have got to do this. We must have intentional training on our minds and love this role. This is what Jesus did. Jesus is the supreme example of training others. He had 3 years to teach, train, communicate, and get them ready for him to not be there. Now, he left his Holy Spirit in them, but he had 3 years. Luke 6:12 through 13 says, one of those days, Jesus went up to a mountainside to pray and spent the night praying to God. When morning came, he called his disciples to him and chose 12 of them. It wasn't 12 people following Jesus around. There were a lot of men following Jesus, and he had to pick 12. You can't train everybody, okay? And sometimes we try to do that. He chose 12, whom he also designated apostles. Mark 3, the same story. Jesus went up to a mountainside and called to him those he wanted, and they came to him. He appointed 12 that they might be with him, and that he might send them out to preach and to have authority to drive out demons. In Matthew 9, at the end of chapter 9, it says, Jesus went through all the towns, villages, teaching in their synagogues, proclaiming the good news of the kingdom and healing every disease and sickness. When he saw the crowds, he had compassion on them because they were harassed and helpless, like sheep without a shepherd. Then he said to his disciples, the harvest is plentiful, but the workers are few. Ask the Lord of the harvest, therefore, to send out workers into his harvest field. And then the very next verse of the next chapter is Jesus called his disciples, 12 disciples, to him and gave them authority to drive out impure spirits, to heal every disease and sickness. Jesus was the Son of God. He could have done it all by himself. But he didn't. He intentionally chose to train these 12 men. He trained them in life, godliness, perspective, family, building friendships, dealing with sin and competitiveness, evangelism, helping others, preaching, healing, dealing with difficult people, dealing with criticism. He addressed their pride, arrogance, and entitlement. He showed them a different perspective on race and prejudice, how to handle family that doesn't understand, perspective on sacrifice, clearly. He taught them the Word. He was the Word. He had to train them in flexibility, serving, attitude toward crowds, how to preach, what to talk about, when to stay, when to move on. What does your intentional training look like? Do you read the Gospels and look at what Jesus did with those men? It wasn't enough for them to just be with them, but be with him and absorb it. Jesus was incredibly specific, and we'll look at that in a minute, on what he was there to do. What his mission was to do. Jesus could have healed everyone. He could have. He could have solved world hunger. He could have solved poverty. I mean, he was the Son of God, and he chose 12 men to work on. And I think that we must, as women, not leave this up to chance, not leave this up to just time together. We need to intentionally train the women in our ministries. And there's a lot to do. There's a lot in their lives. As we learn, we can pass it on. And I just want to talk about two things quickly. There is a lot. And go back, and it's an amazing thing to read through the Gospels, and that's all you're looking for. What did the disciples learn? What did Jesus talk to them about? What was he concerned about? I've lived on 3 continents, 7 different cities, and have appointed over 20 women in the ministry. The needs are the same everywhere. And the first thing is you need to be devoted. You need to be devoted to the women that you've chosen. I mean, you'll choose the women, and somebody's going to get out of the ministry and decide it's not for them. Somebody will fall away. I mean, it happened to the Lord, okay? 1 out of 12. So you think, I don't think we're going to have better odds, okay? I think we'll probably, because we're imperfect people training imperfect people. The perfect discipler lost somebody. So, and the perfect discipler at one point had all 12 that said, no, I'm out of here. So I think that we need to be devoted to people. I mean, it's amazing in John 15, at the end of his earthly time with the 12, what did he say to them? John 15, he says, my command is this: love each other as I have loved you. Greater love has no one than this, to lay down one's life for one's friends. You are my friends if you do what I command. I no longer call you servants, because a servant does not know his master's business. Instead, I have called you friends. For everything that I've learned from my Father, I've made known to you. You did not choose me, but I chose you and appointed you so that you might go and bear fruit that will last, so that whatever you ask in my name, the Father will give you. This is my command: love each other. He was devoted to them. He loved them. That has to be part of our training. This isn't a corporate setting where you're mentoring somebody to be successful in bearing fruit. This is family. You need to love them. You need to be devoted to them. I mean, look what it took. I mean, Jesus, the Creator, is calling the created friend. And I think that part of that is he was devoted. He prayed for them. I mean, isn't that how he started out? Do you pray specifically for the women that you work with? Is it a general prayer? Do you have things that you're praying about in their character, their growth? Are you thanking God for successes? How much time do you devote praying for them? This is so crucial. If you're devoted to them, we must pray. You've got to build family. That's what Jesus did. At the end of his life, he said, you're my friends. I mean, let that sink in for just a minute. The Son of God looking at these 12. And Judas was still around, okay? What it took, the devotion it took, the family that he built. Love, kindness, being in the women's lives. Do you know their family history? Do you know them? Do you celebrate birthdays? I loved what was shared today. I felt like that was just a living example of building family. Including them in your family. Is that what you do? Are there celebrations? Is there care, concern? Do you know what their interests are? Are you there? Do you help? You've got to build family. This isn't a corporate setting where you're apprenticing somebody. This is family. You're raising children. And we have to do it God's way. We need to give our heart as we're devoted to people. Meet their needs. Love the individual. If you don't like people, you're in the wrong profession. Because that's all we do. It's people. All the time. And this can be hard. I mean, think about yourself. Think about the times that you've been difficult. Think about the times that you haven't been humble. And think about the people that gave their heart to you. In the middle of all that we need to give our hearts to people. Sometimes there's sisters that we find it's harder to work with them than others. I mean, we'd love to, we just love everybody, and isn't this awesome? But let's be honest. Sometimes there are sisters we're discipling and we think, I'm sure somebody else could do this because I'm losing my mind. I don't know what to say. I don't know what to do. I had, a lot of those experiences throughout my life. When I was a new intern and I had a sister in New York, I was so intimidated. I just can't even begin to tell you. I'd have an upset stomach every time right before discipling time. Because she was super strong. really, really strong and super opinionated. And I was 21, and she had a teenager already. I mean, it was really, and I learned a lot. There were times when it was really hard to give my heart. I know that I was at least half, if not 3/4 of the problem. But we have situations like that where it's just easier to show up for the discipling time, do our little 2 hours, and I'll see you next week. Not really give our heart, because we all have people that we just love. You know, you have those people where you just naturally click. You're going to be best friends until the day you die, and you've only spent a week with each other. And then there's people that it's not quite as easy as that. A lot of times it's us. I think it's interesting. Jesus didn't pick one kind of person. I mean, who would he have picked that was easy to work with? I don't know. God and the Holy Spirit. I mean, really. We can't work with only one kind of person. And all of us have different people that we like working with. It just clicks. Maybe you're a super, aggressive, go for it, got all the ideas, and you just love people like that. And people that take a little bit more to motivate, it's just frustrating to you. Or maybe you really love the people where, we can just sit and chill and it's great. And the people, I don't know, all of us have people that it's harder to work with. But it stretches us. It stretches us. Think of who Jesus worked with. He had fishermen, businessmen, radicals, men that were really good with people, men that were bothered by crowds, men that were competitive, selfish, rash, men that were cowardly, men that got angry, men that most of the time didn't have a clue what was going on around them, men that lied, men that betrayed, men that didn't stand by him. And yet he gave his heart. At the end of his ministry, he said, "You're my friends." And I think the part of intentionally training is giving our heart. He knew all of this and he chose them. He was patient. I mean, let's be honest about ourselves. What Gina was saying, we can be difficult. I think if we always remember who we are, it's much easier to disciple people and train. I mean, how easy were you? I was awful. I mean, Lisa sat me down about a year after I was in the ministry. I had so much religious pride. She said, and this was the worst thing for somebody growing up religious. Okay, she sat down and she said, "You are so..." Of course, she prefaced it. She was very kind. She never just sort of came right in. She said, what it got around to is, "You're such a Pharisee." Oh, I mean, I was just, but she was right. I mean, go back to your own training. Go back to how you were last week. It'll give you a lot of patience with people. I mean, think about the challenge in discipling the 12 that Jesus did and how often they didn't understand, and his patience was astounding. Give your heart. There will be disappointments. You will have close friends that leave the Lord. You'll have really close people in the ministry that then decide, this isn't really where my gift set is, and then you're not working together in the same way anymore. You'll have people that go on mission teams that you don't have daily contact with anymore. It's hard sometimes, the longer we're Christians, to continue to give our heart, because we know that it can really break. And it's much easier to guard our hearts. I mean, there's this young woman when we were in Brazil who just, you study with that person and you just have already visions of what they're going to do for God. You just know that they're going to take a whole continent, or they're going to be an amazing wife, or whatever the vision is. And you just know it. I mean, as you're studying the Bible. And she was one of those young women. And she became a Christian. Everything was going great. She's a campus student. I started studying with her mother. One of the other team members started studying with the grandmother. I mean, it's one of those, we just feel awesome. And one Wednesday night at church, she talked about how she was just struggling a little bit at home. And I mean, it was the first I'd heard of it. The next day, her mother called me and said, "Patricia won't be back at church." And to this day, I have no clue actually what happened. It was devastating. You've ever had those situations where it's just devastating? The person doesn't become a Christian, or you've worked with them and trained with them, and they decide, "No, I'm good. I'm out of here." It's so hard the next time. It's so hard the next time. But Lamentation says that God's mercies are new every morning. God does this every day. He gives his heart. And I think that that's part of intentional training, is giving our hearts. We need to equip them. You know, if you look at Matthew 10, I mean, if you look at the list of what Jesus tells them to do, it's astounding. I mean, don't go among the Gentiles. Go to the lost sheep of Israel. Proclaim this message. Heal the sick. Raise the dead. Cleanse those who have leprosy. Drive out demons. He gives them financial advice. You know, don't get any gold or silver to take with you. No bag for the journey. Whatever town and village you're in, search there. I mean, there's a lot of instruction in what Jesus... He didn't just say, hey, go out, share your faith, come back and tell me how it went. I mean, do you equip the sisters that you work with? Do you equip them in their walk with God? Do you help them study? Help them grow? Pray together? Do you teach at your small group meeting or staff meeting? Do you have great lessons? You need to equip people. Do you equip the women you're training to effectively study the Bible with other people? Yes, the Word is powerful, but the Bible talks about handling it effectively. I mean, how often have you sent somebody out and you think they're ready and they come back and you're sort of at the counting the cost point and you're like, oh, wow, there's a lot that was missed. They didn't know that they had to deny themselves. We need to back up. And we've all been in those situations. Do you equip the women to effectively study the Bible with other women? Do you love the lost together? Do you teach them how to love others, how to grow in their faith and friendships? We need to equip the women to train, to effectively study the Bible, to walk with their God. We need to, and here's one of the things that I really want to communicate. You need to equip the women to train others. This isn't just about their own walk with God and how to study the Bible. This is, are they equipped to train others? Do they understand that they are being trained to train? To train others. It will change the way they think, the way they process, the way they study you. It'll change the way they look at messages. Are they looking at the messages, okay, I'm going to have to get up next month and teach, so what is Karen doing? How is she teaching this class? Do they understand that they are training to be trainers? What are your goals for them? Do you have 3-month goals and 6-month goals? Where do you want them to be in 1 year, 2 year, 5 years? You've got to think of those things so you know what to work on. Ask yourself, what does someone look like that's ready to lead, that's on their own? And then work backwards. What needs to grow, transform, change? You need to believe in them. You need to see past either their worldly success or their failures to see what they can become. I think of Sarah Lawaye in Kenya. Super successful, incredibly prominent family, but I had to see past that to what God wanted to do with her, because she was pretty confident in what she did. And she had to see what God wanted to work on in her. I think of Daisy Aguaya, also in Kenya. She was on the mission team. I had to see past, she's very Latina. And we arrived in Nairobi, Kenya, and she was dressed in pink from head to toe. I mean, pink shoes, pink jeans, pink shirt, pink dress, a pink top, band in her hair. And I had to sort of see past the 20-year-old Daisy and what God wanted to do in her life, and see past the external things. Again, prayer, study them. What gifts has God given them? Are you helping them to grow? Don't be discouraged by apparent setbacks. Never forget your own growth, what I said earlier. Imagine if Jesus had not been able to see past Paul's religious past, or Peter's rashness, or John and James's anger, or Thomas's doubting. We need to believe in the women we work with. It takes time. You can't do it quickly. It took the Son of God 3 years. It's going to take us a little longer, I think. And lastly, I just want to cover real quickly is to keep working with the young. And some of you are young, and so you're glad you're being worked with. This is hard work. And I think as we get older, it's easier to work with older people. There's less drama. There's less hassle. Think about discipling right now in your ministry a 22-year-old. And some of you that are 22, we love you. It's awesome. But we had to learn too. And you've got a lot to learn, which is awesome. I think of the women that I worked with when I moved to San Antonio. Diana Wilkinson was 21 years old. I was 41. I was older than her mother. I think it's the first time I discipled somebody that I was older than their parent. It's tempting to work with married women that are wonderful and awesome, but aren't necessarily going to continue to build the church. They will. I want to communicate, though, that who are you working with? The young. There was a lot of training, discipling to do. I work right now with two 24-year-olds. In fact, one of them just turned 24. You've got to keep working with the young. There's lots to teach. Who's training your young women? Do they know what they're doing in training young women? Are you working with them? Here's my concern is I think we do have amazing women's ministries. But I do think there's places where we're managing our women's ministry and not training. Amen. Not intentionally training. Who are you raising up? We're not going to win the world by taking care of our children and the women in the church. We've got to, we need to do all that. Amen. I think that we're all set on that. But you've got to raise up. You've got to get training into the hearts of the women. I think of Lee Kuan Yew, who started this city and did an amazing job. Here's what he said in his autobiography. After stepping down from being prime minister for 25 years, he took up the role of training the next generation of leaders. And here's a quote from his memoir. I set the target at 1988, when I would be 65, believing that the sooner I give up, the younger I will be and the more active I can be to make sure the team succeeds. I'll be around to make sure the team can succeed. The later I give up, the older and slower I will be, and the more risky its success. I just think we've got to keep working with the young. We need to intentionally be devoted, intentionally train them. And I pray that God will give us great success, that we will love our place in the kingdom. It's such an honor to be able to give what we've been given, that we will love our roles, use our gifts, and always learn as we are part of building God's church. Amen.